we're going to go to a clip of the film where our next guest interviews the Vice President of Bolivia. Yes, I'm talking about John Perkins, the best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He's back with a new book. It's called Hoodwinked. An economic hitman reveals why the world financial markets imploded and what we need to do to remake them. We go now to John Perkins in this clip from The End of Poverty, interviewing Bolivia's Vice President Alvaro Garcia Linera for the film The End of Poverty.
Bolivia is a country with so many natural resources. Why does a country like this have so many poor people?
I think this has to do with what we call the colonial condition of our societies. Countries that have a collection of natural resources, renewable or non-renewable, seem to be condemned to be poor countries. It's paradoxical, isn't it? Unfortunately, colonialism is always a part of the development of capitalism. There's an emancipation process that happens through the implementation of a different global economic order than the current one. That's why a total, simple, and definite break with colonialism allows us to imagine a world economic order, globalized in a different way than that which is driven by the accumulation of capital.
What things can Bolivia do? Or should they do to bring about necessary change?
This is a country of 9 million inhabitants, where 62% of the population is indigenous, both in the cities and the farmlands. Bolivia is a country with mestizos, aymaras, los quechas, carnismo, Jeño, Trinitarios, Irinos, 32 indigenous groups and nations. But unfortunately, in the 181 years of the Republic's political life, the indigenous people were never recognized as citizens with collective rights. Never. This continent is waking up. I like the idea of a continent in movement as a synthesis of what's been happening during the past 5 to 6 years in Latin America. There's a movement developing of world citizenship and planetary responsibility. There is something beautiful happening in these countries, which makes them get involved in the situations of countries like Bolivia, a country that wants to live a better life, where 58% of the people live on less than $2 a day.
An excerpt from the research done for The End of Poverty. That clip was actually made for Democracy Now!, thanks to Felipe Diaz and Cinema Libre Studio for that. The interview done with the Bolivian Vice President by John Perkins, who will now join us in our Firehouse studio after break.
In the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who's that yonder, dressed in red? God's gonna trouble the water. Well, it looks like the children that Martin led. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, who's that
Ruth Harris of the SNCC Singers singing at the memorial service for Mary Travers in Riverside Church, where 1,000 turned out. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. John Perkins calls himself a former economic hitman. He has seen the signs of today's financial meltdown before. The subprime mortgage fiasco, the collapse of the banking industry, the rising unemployment rate, these are all familiar to him. Perkins was on the front lines of monitoring and helping create these very events that were once just confined to the third world. From 71 to 1981, he worked for the international consulting firm Chas T. Main, where he was a self-described economic hitman. It was based in Boston. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller Confessions of an Economic Hitman and The Secret History of the American Empire. Well, he's out with a new book. It's called Hoodwinked. An economic hitman reveals why the world financial markets imploded and what we need to do to remake them. He joins me here in the Firehouse studio. Welcome, John. Well, for starters, though we've discussed this before, what exactly does an economic hitman mean?
Well, Amy, I think it's fair to say that we economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Allow us to build a military base in your backyard. Something along these lines. And when we fail, as I talk in my books, I failed with Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, Omar Torrijos of Panama. The jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military.
And what personal experience do you have to prove this?
Well, I was there. I was with Jaime Roldos in Ecuador. I was one of the guys who was supposed to corrupt him, bring him around, and Omar Torrijos of Panama, and many others. When I failed with those two gentlemen, the jackals went in and assassinated both of them. And I was in those front lines. My official title was chief economist of Charles T. Main. I had about 36 employees working for me, and did this for 10 years, and finally saw the light. But I think what's really important about all this is that in this period of time, since the 1970s and really beginning very strongly in the 1980s, we've created what I consider a mutant viral form of capitalism. You earlier on the program, you showed the statistics of 37% of the people in this survey not believing that capitalism's working. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we've developed in the last 30 or 40 years, particularly beginning with the time of Reagan and Milton Friedman's economic theories, which stress that the only goal of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs, and not to regulate businesses at all. Regulation's bad of all forms, and to privatize everything so that everything's run by private business. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world.
You talk about the robber barons, the modern-day robber barons. Who do you mean?
So many of them. We've seen them recently on Wall Street, the people from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup and so many other organizations. People like Jack Welch, who is a former CEO of General Electric. And as I lecture at business schools and MBA programs, Jack Welch is often held up as this idol. Jack Welch laid off a quarter of GE's employees